Welcome to the Educational Leadership Podcast, the podcast where education meets innovation and leaders like you transform schools into thriving communities. Join us as we guide you through the ever-evolving world of educational leadership, from strategies that inspire your staff to insights that shape your students' futures. We're here to sharpen your skills, amplify your talents, and ignite your impact. So grab your coffee, a notebook, and most importantly, your growth mindset as we embark on a journey to redefine what it means to lead with purpose and passion. This isn't just a podcast, it's professional development. Let's build better schools together, one episode at a time. Now, here's your host, Principal JL. Today, I'm excited to have Leroy Slanzi on the show. He is a seasoned educator with over 25 years of experience in the field. He is currently a practicing educational leader and has done it all from being a principal at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. Leroy is also the author of the influential book, Emotional Schools, which dives deep into the essential role emotional intelligence and mental health play in our education system. Beyond the page, Leroy is a dynamic facilitator of professional development, a trusted voice of numerous podcasts, and a sought-after speaker whose guidance helps parents, teachers, and school leaders navigate the chaos life throws our way. I'm excited to share with you his educational leadership journey. Now let's get to the conversation with Leroy Slanzi. Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. Today, I am so excited to bring in Leroy Slanzi. Leroy, welcome to the show.
Jeff, thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Leroy, I like to start off everybody with the same question. What inspired you to become an educator?
It's a funny story. I think it started when I was a kid, 5 years old, growing up in a trailer park. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm almost 50 years old, and our parents kicked us out, told us to come home when the street lights went off, and so I was always that guy who was making sure we were having fun. So I coordinated everything. So I think starting early, I just loved being a kid and being coordinating kids and then eventually, as I grew older, I started playing sports, and then I became a lifeguard and a swimming instructor at 16 years old. And I just loved it. So I started teaching early when I started teaching swimming. And then, I ended up going into college, into teaching school. And, the rest was history. I coached for 25 years as well as being a teacher. And a principal. So it's just always been one of those things that, it's been natural for me just to be that kind of a person. I'm just engaged and wanting to constantly have something going on for people, right? So that was just a natural fit.
Awesome. Now, Leroy, what did you decided to go into teaching? What area did you become a teacher in? And let's talk about some of your coaching. Let's talk about what did you coach and how did that all transpire within your educational career?
Sure. So ironically, I did an American history degree. Because I love American history. You guys are interesting down there, to say the least. And that pre-Trump stuff, like I just loved learning about Franklin Roosevelt and all the stuff that was going on down there, and I was just fascinated by it. It also helped that I had a fantastic American history professor in college. He was from the States, and man, he could tell stories, and I just couldn't get enough of him. So I actually went to school to be a social studies teacher. That's what I was hoping to do. Social studies, grade 5, 6. And ironically, my first job, I ended up in a foundation skills class. So back 25 years ago, they used to stream kids here in British Columbia, Canada. And so I was in a class for kids, if they had learning disabilities, behavior problems, whatnot, they were put in one class. And so that's what I did. I taught for 3 years doing that. And then I just found a real niche and a real passion for working with kids with disabilities. So I did my master's in special ed, and I ended up, being a special ed teacher for 3 years, and then somehow flipped into being a vice principal very early in my career. But yeah, so that's kind of my story there. I was a teacher for 6 years and then was an admin quick.
There you go. All right, Leroy. So let's talk about being a classroom teacher, special education teacher. I always feel like those people are just special people. They have to have
Hmm.
patience, and you're dealing with some really tough kids that they just need that extra guidance. They need things, structure, and there's a lot of different ways you can go into that environment. What are some things that you learn as a special education teacher? What are some things that, as your time, that stands out for you?
I think one of the things that I had to learn early on, being a special education teacher, is not so much the students. I found that the kids were quite easy. They're quite entertaining. They were very passionate kids. They wanted to learn. And again, their progressions were a lot smaller than kids who are not neurotypical. But what I had to learn most as a special ed teacher is how to manage the adults. I find that when special ed kids, and it's, I know it's the same everywhere. When special ed kids are in a classroom, if you're in an inclusive school, that puts a lot of pressure on teachers because then they have to differentiate their instruction. They have to work with, in Canada, we call them IEPs, individualized education plans. I know there's all kinds of names for them, but essentially it's a plan for a kid with special needs. And so, I'd have to deal with a lot of frustrations, a lot of teachers struggling with keeping up with managing that. And then if it was a kid who had a designation that came with certain behaviors and whatnot. So I think in terms of being the leader I am now, I really learned that structure and understanding emotional intelligence, which ties into my book and some of the stuff I do because I do a lot of work with other schools other than my own. I do a lot of workshops and stuff around emotional intelligence. I had to learn how to manage that emotional intelligence piece and that social intelligence piece with the adults, with the kids. And then I had to learn structure because as a special ed teacher, the easier I could make it for teachers, the better it was for my special ed kids. And I think that was probably the biggest thing I had to learn is that I couldn't go in thinking that all teachers were going to be like me, this gigantic hearts, going to work the extra 2 to 3 hours to make sure that I was prepared for my kids. Cause I started my career in a foundational skills class with not as a special ed teacher, but just teaching those kids. So, but I found, really quickly, and I was a special ed teacher in a high school too. So you can imagine you have special need kids in there in a calculus 11 class or, a kid who's neurodivergent and and they're on the spectrum there and they're can do pre-cal, but their behavior may not be what the teacher wants in there. Right. So that was the biggest learning thing is that really kind of slapped me in the face that I better get a firm grip on emotional intelligence to make sure that this is best for my kids.
So during your teaching time, what is the one thing you love the most about teaching?
The kids still is. I just love interacting with kids. So a good example. So I've been in several elementary schools and every elementary school I've been in, I don't have a principal's office. I work out of a classroom. So that way I'm part of I'm a cog in the wheel. And so I support my teachers and my kids by being in a space that's open. The doors are open all the time. And I do that because I have to be around kids. And same thing with coaching. Here in Canada, we don't get stipends for coaching. We actually volunteer our time. And so I coached basketball for almost 25 years and I coached swim club for some time too. And I did that because I just enjoy being around kids. I enjoy the growth. I love watching them learn. I love how they, when you get them going, they develop that grit and perseverance and passion, all that sort of stuff. So
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, amazing educational leaders. If you're finding value in this podcast, learning new insights, getting inspired, or just nodding along thinking, yep, I needed that, then why keep it to yourself? Share this podcast with a colleague, a fellow school leader, or a teacher that is inspiring into leadership. Send them a link, post about it, or just casually drop, hey, you need this in your life the next time you see them. Let's grow this community of game-changing educators together because great leadership isn't a solo act, it's a movement. Now, back to the show. Yeah. And I know you kind of touched on it a little bit about understanding emotional intelligence and how that shaped you as a teacher to help you into the role, into leadership. Are there anything else that shaped you during your teaching time to take that next step? And if and what it was that, and then how did that inspire you to become a principal, assistant principal in this case to start off with? How did that all wrapped up together there?
Well, I think like a lot of people that go into admin, sometimes we have great administrators when we're teachers, and sometimes we have shitty ones. And I think, and I think, you know, I was lucky because I had both. I had some good administrators, but I also had some not so good ones. And I felt early on in my career, which is, I don't know how normal it is, but early on, I felt that if I could get into a leadership position, I would run a school differently. I would do it differently, not only for my kids, but for my teachers, because I love teachers. I think teachers are our greatest asset and our greatest resource. And if we can teach teachers, you know, to be, what they can be, through emotional intelligence, your culture will thrive, and your numeracy and literacy rates will go up. Your attendance will decrease. It decrease in the sense that you won't have as many kids absent, and that's been the truth. So, I think part of it was I wanted to affect change on a more macro level than just on a classroom.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You talk about how, you have some principles that you watched, right? And how you go, hey, you know what? I really like what that guy does. Or, hey, I really like what she did or didn't do. And you kind of take notes. I was kind of the same way as a teacher where I was watching my leaders going, I like that. I didn't quite like that. Maybe I'll do something different than that. And so it sounds like you kind of did the same thing as I did, is when as a teacher, you kind of watched your leaders and it kind of helped you develop maybe your leadership style or how you would like to go about doing that. So let's talk about your assistant principalship. What got you into it? Was there a moment where it was a tap on the shoulder that someone says it's time? Did you know it was time? Did it just kind of sneak up on you? Did it happen organically? There's so many different ways that, how did you step into that leadership role as an assistant principal?
Yeah, interesting. So I was a department head in the high school in student services, so you're the department head of counselors, special ed teachers, anyone who supports students, work experience teachers, that sort of thing. And I was in a really toxic school at the time. And so I actually put in a request to transfer schools, just to go to a school where I wasn't, because I couldn't affect change on the toxicity. So I thought I'm not one of those people that I'm going to sit around and bitch about something. If I can't make a change, I'm not going to just complain and spin wheels. I'm going to move. Right. And I think that's my advice to teachers and principals. If you're in a district or if you're in a school and it's just not changing and you can't, don't wallow in that. Just get out and go somewhere else. Right. And so I actually went to go somewhere else, and the superintendent kind of said to me, I'd like to meet with you because I heard you're going to move, because there's a smaller district. And I said, yeah, I'm going to go. I would like to be a special ed teacher in another school. I'm on that level in the seniority list. And he goes, well, if you don't mind, can you apply for the vice principal position out at a different school? He goes, you're doing some good work. I understand you're a department head. You're doing some stuff around. I was using the AVID program. It's an American program. So we're using the AVID program, and I was leading that. And I said, vice principal. I said, I've been teaching. I've only been at this for 6 years. He goes, I think you got what it takes. And so I applied, and the rest was history. I became a vice principal or assistant principal in the States. And and it's been 19, 20 years. I've been in admin since then.
Yeah. So let's talk about being the assistant principal or vice principal. I mean, we say it both ways here, depending on where you're at in America.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, your vice principalship. What are some things you learned? What are some things that you gained from that helped you become a better leader? And what advice could you give somebody in that role that is looking to get into that assistant principal role down the road?
Again, you're going to hear me throughout this podcast going back to emotional intelligence. There's one story I had. So I became a vice principal and things were going great. I made sure I sat in on school-based team meetings. I was the head of the special ed department. I wanted to make sure I stuck to things that I was really good at. I dove into athletics because I was coaching, but I wasn't really familiar with, dealing with behavior and having to suspend kids. And the first kid I ever suspended in my life, I phoned home and I said to mom, I'm like, hey, listen, your daughter's doing this, that, and the other. They crossed the line. It's time for them to go home. And mom said to me, nope. I'm a, pardon? She said, my daughter's not suspended. She'll be at school tomorrow. And I was like, what? You don't get, I was in my head. I'm like, you don't get to say that. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, I'm suspending your daughter. They can't be on school property there. And it blew up. And I raised my voice. She raised her voice. And it just went sideways. And afterwards I was done. I kind of hung up the phone, not knowing if this kid was going to show up the next day. And I went to the principal next door. And he said to me, Leroy, have you ever eaten crow? And I said, no, I've never eaten crow. I've eaten a lot of things. I've eaten rattlesnake. And he goes, well, if you put a little salt on it, it tastes pretty good. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, you handled that parent all wrong. He goes, when you talk to a parent, the first thing you should be asking them is for help. And I said, oh, he goes, so when you're phoning to suspend a kid, you need to say, hey, this is the situation that's going on. We're kind of hitting the line. I need some help from you. Can you tell me what you're doing? How you're, and he's preaching to me about emotional intelligence. And I went into this having my emotions rise and fall with this parent. She clearly flipped her lid, and I wasn't being empathetic, and, I wasn't being mindful, and it just went sideways. And so I learned early on as a vice principal. And again, I go back to being a department head and then being a vice principal. It comes down to teachers, and you have to be emotionally intelligent if you're going to develop a strong culture in your school. Because if you're not, your school environment's going to become toxic, and your parental environment's going to become toxic. So that first suspension, I know the kid's first name, last name. I know mom's first name. I know I will never forget that. And that was 20 years ago. And I have never, and since then I've suspended, I don't know, 500, 600,000 kids. I've worked in high schools, middle schools, elementary school. Middle schools, you're guaranteed to suspend some of those clowns. But, and to this day, it's the one suspension. There's the one parent who refused a suspension. It never happened again after that. And that is something that's resonated with me. And when I have vice principals, I teach that. I front load anyone new coming into being assistant principals about emotional intelligence. And now every school I go into, we have an emotional intelligence structure. We have an emotional schools framework that we use that's embedded into what we do. So our culture is thriving in that capacity, right? So.
Yeah, that's a really great story to learn. I think as assistant principals, like I have never been assistant principal. For some reason, I went from teacher right into the building principal role.
Boy.
But I was a small town, small rural school principal where I still dealt with all the suspensions. I dealt with everything. I had a lot of hats today. I was suspension. Yeah, I'm doing this. I'm doing that. So I know I've been through that. I've learned lessons like that to where how you approach, how do you talk, how do you get the parent to help you with their child, because you're always trying to say, hey, your kid better than I do. So how can we work together to make this so this situation doesn't A, become worse, but B, we can move forward without having a repeat of this behavior or the situation that you're working through with that. So that was a really great story that you shared there, Leroy. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about, you went from assistant principal to principal to building leader. What was it that inspired you to go from that role into that role? Was it is there a story that goes behind it? Did it kind of happen naturally, or what perspired for you to go from assistant principal or vice principal into principalship?
It was time. I wanted my own building. I after 3 years, and again, the principal I worked for was great, awesome guy. But by the end of the 3 years that I was an assistant principal, it was time for me to now to do, to implement a system and develop a culture that I thought was going to, you know, be right for students and staff. And so I ended up applying for two principal jobs, and I got hired for both of them, so I had to turn one down, and I ended up middle school principal for my first gig, and that was tough. Middle schools are tough. I was a teacher at
Yeah.
middle school for 3 years, so I already knew. But then I became a principal of a middle school, so it was something that was necessary, and it was just time, because you get to a point when you're an assistant principal, it's like you want it to be your own baby, right? You want to
Mhm.
nurture something and grow it, and then and you learn a lot in those. Because I was only there for 3 years before I moved to an elementary school for six. But it was yeah, no, it's a beautiful, beautiful 3 years.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about, do you have a story that you could share about being a middle school principal? Because we all know there's got to be
Okay.
something there. But also talk about going from middle school, because you also talked about being a high school principal. Talk about like what it's like to be a middle school principal, what it's like to be an elementary principal, and then what is it like to be a high school principal? Because they're all three just different animals, and you just have that unique experience, and I love people to just understand the difference between those different areas as a principal.
Yeah, if somebody came to me, because I'm 51 now and I've been doing this for 25 years, if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, can you be a principal of this middle school?" I'd say no. I think all middle schools should be labeled as Bart Simpson academies. Um, girls are overly dramatic, more so than they are in high school, because it's all emotional. You talk
Mhm,
about a culture of emotional intelligence, and this is I wished I would have known then what I know now about
mhm.
developing an emotional schools framework, where I could have implemented the right framework with the right common language and the right competencies. But I tell you, it was like I was living in an episode of Bart Simpson every day. There'd be kids flicking lights on and off. Garbage cans would sometimes get lit on fire. Vaseline on door handles, condoms in the spots they shouldn't be in. I'd go into the gym and kids are jumping off the mezzanine onto mats. It's just energy, and nothing serious, like nothing. I mean, when a garbage can got lit on fire, it was kind of serious, but there was never anything really serious. It was just all of this like juvenile boy behavior. The girls, it was more dealing with trauma, and
Mhm.
girls can be mean to each other. Oh man, they beat each other up. But the boys, it's just constant, just constant. And it wore me down just because the hardest part was that I would find a lot of it hilarious. Like I kids would do something and I'd have to discipline them, because I believe in consequences as well as teaching self-regulation and emotional intelligence. And I would go back into my office and I would just laugh. I'm like, oh my God, that was the most funny thing in the world. I just find the stuff that did humorous, even though they'd sometimes get suspended, and it was just like this, right? So yeah, it was tough being in a middle school. It is tough. I give a lot of credit to middle school teachers, man. They Wow, wow, they're dealing with kids at an interesting, and I've raised two kids too, right? My son is now 18 and in college, and my daughter's 16 in high school. But man, oh man, it's that's just that age 11 to 13 there. It's like, holy moly.
Hell yeah. So what was it like to be a principal at the elementary level?
It's funny because people ask me, where my favorite level is, because I've been in a couple high schools and a couple elementary schools. And what I really, because I coached, and I coached high school at the high school level. I did coach elementary stuff too, but what I really liked about high schools is that kids, when they're in grade 11 and 12, are really mature, and they're starting to think about life, and they worry about their mental health, and they worry about what's going to happen with their future, and they worry about what their career is going to be. And it's kind of cool that way. It's just a more mature, kind of sort of a peaceful environment, I find, with the odd, except when their behavior's bad, it's bad, and it could be
Mm,
dangerous at times, right? And then I look at elementary, and in elementary school, kids think you're Superman. They think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? And that's, who doesn't love, when I talk emotional intelligence, it's all centered around your ego. It's how your ego is either overactive and underactive. And when you're in an elementary school, you can't leave it every day. You leave thinking you're the best principal in the entire planet, right? Because I think the kids think you walk around with a cape on. So, I think I'm more partial to elementary because I do, when kids smile and adore you, like my own children when they're little, I can't get a hug out of my daughter right now, and she used to worship me, right? So there's that. But I also, the high school's got some really, really cool parts to it too.
Yeah, you kind of hit on a couple of things there. You kind of helped me reflect back on my time at Southern Valley, which is a small rural school. It's actually a one site area. It's K-12. So we
Awesome.
had an elementary side connected to the elementary gym, which was connected to the high school gym, which is connected to the secondary side. So I was the 712 principal. So I had to deal with middle school age kids all the way up through high school kids in that building. We had about 175 students total on my side. But if I was having a rough go, I just walk over to the elementary side, and those kids would just like, Mr. Linden, we love you. They just come up and they give me hugs. And like, it was the best thing ever because like, I can always go over to the elementary side and those kids would just love you. They'll give you hugs. They'll give you high fives. It kind of just made you go, you know what? This is why I do what I do. And I love that part. Now you still get some of that with the upper level guys, but they just, they kind of don't, they're too cool for that at times. Right.
Yeah, they can.
And now being at the high school level, that is my niche. I really enjoy the high school age kids. I feel like the people that do elementary are special, just like the special education teachers are, it takes a special type of person to work with those kids. I don't have the patience for it, but I can deal with middle school kids, but I do prefer high school kids because those middle school kids, man, it's just sometimes you're just like, they're not thinking straight. They're just like, what are you doing? And I think the best part about being a 712 principal is I had 2 years to straighten them out before they got into high school. So that was the best part about it. But now being a high school principal, I have to bring in the eighth graders into as ninth graders. And it takes us about 9 weeks to get them where we need to go. Because we have to go, this is no longer middle school. And this is our expectation. Let's get you guys where you need to go. And it takes a little bit of time. It's a little rough at the beginning, but by the time we get about, 6 to 9 weeks into the school year, it all smooths itself out. So they start figuring it out and things like that. There are different, they're just different beasts. And I really enjoy you sharing your experiences with that. So let's talk about your book. What inspired you, or what was the moment that inspires you to write the book Emotional Schools?
I think it's because kids changed and it started, a lot of people want to blame COVID as the thing that changed kids, but I think it started about, 10, 15 years ago. Kids are playing less. There's less free play, or they're out in the neighborhood, throwing the ball around or riding their bikes or climbing trees. Technology come into play, which caused a lot of that. Parents are fearful. I think there's a lot of parents have shifted in terms of how they parent. We see more gentle parenting. We see more helicopter parenting. And I think for teachers, our role started to shift from one of we're a teacher to now co-parents. And you really started to see kids who are becoming less able to deal with stress because of all these environmental factors in life, right? And a lot of it is due to technology. A lot of it's due to both parents having to work. And a lot of it is, a fear that your kid is going to get kidnapped. A lot of it's because it costs money to play sports. But it was the perfect storm. And I think as, we've seen over the years, that kids are shifting. We're seeing more kids with anxiety disorders, more kids with mood disorders, with behavior disorders, on top of special needs designations, right? And so here in Canada, the United States, Australia, Europe, so I have a lot of connections all over the world, and we're seeing it worldwide. The World Health Organization has a lot of data out on kids who have mental health issues, and so it's something that's exponentially growing. And I know you can attest to it, Jeff. Our kids' behavior and their ability to cope is diminishing, which led me to writing my book and developing an emotional schools framework that revolves around emotional intelligence, so we can we can teach kids how to cope. Because now we have kids who can barely get through a difficult math question without, losing it or quitting. And whereas back in the day, in the olden days, kids actually did homework at home, and now, God forbid, you send homework home with kids because parents aren't going to help them with it. And nor are the kids going to do it because they're just not. And so, we're just dealing with a different generation of parents and a different generation of kids. And so it led me to write a book on what the state of education is like in the United States. And my focus was more United States and Canada and North America because our educational systems are quite similar. Although Australia is quite similar too. I've done a lot of work down there too. And I just wanted to kind of portray what's happening in schools and then teach educators, principals, teachers, superintendents about how important it is to understand the science of emotions, understand ego, understand how that emotional intelligence, social intelligence piece has to be incorporated and embedded into reading, writing, and arithmetic. Because if we don't, our schools are just going to keep spiraling with behavior issues. Teachers are going to keep burning out. Teachers aren't going to want to do the job. And, and kids are going to get less and less productive as we continue. And so that's what the book is it's basically a guide for schools. And it's a first, like I said, it talks about the history and why we're at where we're at. And then it provides the science of it, and then provides a nice solid plan for schools to embed into their systems. And the nice part about it is, I do a lot of professional development workshops. I go to a lot of schools and I work with them to embed this emotional skills framework into their schools. And the biggest frustration for teachers is having to do professional development that's going to be meaningless, or that's just added on to their day and it's just extra work. And it does. And what I do is about it's something that you come in, it's a 1-day workshop. And then teachers, like if you can see behind me, the colored posters and the competencies, those revolve around emotional intelligence. And you work with schools within their systems, with their structures, with their programming, their reading, writing, math, English programs, their sports programs. And I teach them how to embed this in there so it becomes culturally enabled, right? And so that's what the book is about. That's the work I do on the side of being a principal, because it's so crucial in this day and age, because kids can just not handle stress. And a lot of it, again, I think free play, that kids going outside and not wiping out on their bike or having to organize a game of tag like I used to when I was 5 years old, or a game of street hockey outside. And kids don't do that anymore. They're not out there getting into arguments with their buddies or having to communicate how we're going to play a game. And so they're losing those critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, the ability to communicate naturally. Those natural things that were developed as kids for us aren't there anymore. And you can't blame parents and you can't blame society, because it's just where we've shifted with technology, right? And so that's why we had to write, because we're in a different era, and you can't. And what's frustrating is sitting here after all these years and watching schools sit in the same, spinning their wheel the same way. Let's keep doing it this way. Reading, writing, arithmetic, assessment, standardized tests. This is how you do it with behavior. Or it's either schools either go really too soft with behavior, or they're too hard with behavior. And it should be a combination of old and new together, right? And so that's what I wrote in the book, and that's what I do when I work with schools all over the place. Is I teach schools how to embed it and do it. And it's fantastic.
So you kind of hit on a lot of things there, Leroy.
Yeah.
And
I know.
and so I hear you. I'm 46 years old. I'll be 47 here in July. So I was one of those kids. I was out playing. We were running the neighborhood. We were doing all those things. And now it's like, oh my gosh, we don't want our kids to run around and do what we did. But we're missing that. And I know I read a book recently called The Anxious Generation. I don't know if you're aware of that book.
I've heard of it, yeah.
But it has talked about how technology has taken away the free play. You kind of hit on that a little bit, and how they went from free play childhood into a handheld device, or a device, electronic childhood, where they're getting all their interactions through a phone or a computer, where, that is actually affecting our students' ability in school, because that's where they have that with them at all times. And I know for us, we've really, we kind of want to have high expectations. We want to be able to understand, we want to teach you how to utilize technology correctly. When's a proper time to use it? We want you to be educated. So we have worked, the last couple, 2 or 3 years since I've been here as a principal in my school here at Hastings High to try to help kids understand, yeah, this is a tool. This is something you can use, but there's times where you need to not use it so you can be educated and learn the things you do. But we also need to teach them social interactions. We need to teach them what's the best time and place for those things, because if they're not learning that, they're going to get out of school and they're going to go to a job and get fired because they haven't learned the skills they need to learn when it comes on how to do that. And so, do you have like a story with schools that you worked with that implemented some of your emotional support competencies and framework into it, and how did it change their overall culture and school climate?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
All right, educational leaders, you know how we tell our students feedback makes us better? Well, same goes for this podcast. If you've been getting value from this podcast, please take 60 seconds to leave a quick 5-star review. This review isn't just a pat on the back, although I appreciate it. It helps other leaders find the show, join the conversation, and grow right along with us. More reviews equal more reach equal a stronger community of game-changing educators. So hit that review button, drop a few words, and let's keep making educational leadership better together. Now, back to the show.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little story that just happened today. So today we had a group. They're actually from Utah. They've been traveling through Canada. They're traditional dancers, and they came to our school. And I invited another elementary school from down the road. And there's about 400 people in there, and so the dancers were there. And afterwards, at an Indigenous school, having a gathering and providing food is very important to the culture of Indigenous people. And so the people were barbecues. We just did burgers and hot dogs, and they're barbecuing outside. And I get on the mic, and I'm always about joking, right? And I get up there, I'm like, "You guys smell that?" And they're like, "Yeah, it smells delicious." I'm like, "Really?" Because I just farted, and I make a joke, and all the kids. But I mean, you tell a fart joke, you're the funniest guy in the world, right? So all the kids start laughing, and then I wait. And so part of being emotionally intelligent is that you can take some deep breaths, you can self-soothe, and bring yourself back. So my school. My kids are on one side and this goes on the other side. So I wait. My kids are used to it because I have Monday morning assemblies where we talk about behavior. We teach self-regulation. We talk about emotions. We teach breathing. It's embedded into what we do. And so my kids, within 15 seconds, they're ready. They're listening to Leroy now. And this other school, they can't bring it together. So I had to get on the mic and say, "Okay, listen, take some deep breaths, come back to me, and I need you to be quiet now." So I had to use words to get them to self-regulate. With my kids, I didn't. So afterwards, the principal, who's a good buddy of mine, and he's going to hear this, he goes, "Leroy," he goes, "I love fart jokes." I'm like, "Me too." And he says, "You can't tell a fart joke and expect kids to regulate afterwards." And I said, "Yes, I can." Because when you embed emotional intelligence, you embed self-regulation, you can do almost anything with your kids because they will learn how to take those deep breaths and calm their mind so their prefrontal cortex can work. And it was proof was in the pudding. And I said, "Yes, I can." I said, "You just need to do the work with your school and you need to do some of these things." And we kind of left it at that. And he has his own philosophy in doing things. And he's a good buddy of mine. So, I just kind of let him be. But when I do when I do go and work with other schools, and I've worked with a lot of schools, and what I do is I go in and I teach the background. Why are we here? Like, what got us here? No free play, where they develop, because free play is crucial to developing those characteristics around learning, which is, communication, collaboration, critical creative thinking, personal social awareness, all those things. Right. And so, when I go into schools, I teach them all that. And then I teach them about the science behind it and understanding emotion. So when they do see a kid get emotional, they know right away that if they teach the kids about the science, the brain science, and I teach 5-year-olds about how the brain works with your emotions. And we teach them, if you take deep breaths and you soothe, it allows your prefrontal cortex to work. And so I teach schools to teach that. And then we use the common language that's here in these colored posters plus the competency posters. And so it's always front and center. And you would be amazed what happens in people's schools. All of a sudden, these kids in kindergarten or grade 1 who are learning how to blend vowel sounds, or having to, when they're learning how to read, or if they're learning how to use a pen, how they can persevere, and they have more rigor, and they have more ability to cope because they're aware of themselves. They're aware of how they're feeling. And so it becomes this drastic change in schools where all of a sudden it's easier for teachers to teach because kids can self-soothe. And so when they're feeling frustrated or angry or sad or mad, where, sometimes they flip a desk or crawl under a table, a lot of that stuff starts to dissipate, right? I only see in my school behavior from kindergarten and grade 1 kids because they're just learning it. And so a lot of schools I work with, high schools too, we work this stuff right through high schools, middle schools. And when you teach this stuff, man, it makes a drastic change because all of a sudden kids, and there's an attendance crisis right around the world. In Australia, they call them ghost children, where since COVID, they're just not attending. And a lot of it's this anxiety stuff, right? That you were talking about from that book. And when you have kids who can cope with stress, they start coming back to school, and all of a sudden your attendance rates are better. And when your attendance rates are better, guess what? A monkey can get kids to learn how to read and write and do math because they're there every day, right? And so I think that's the biggest piece that I've noticed when I work with schools, is that even schools that are doing great, you can make them excellent, and you can make teaching excellent. And the other piece of that is you see staff, when I work with a school, you see that toxicity between staff members decrease because they're also aware. It's like, okay, I need to be aware of how I'm feeling in this situation, what I'm bringing to the table. I need to be socially aware. So I need to understand what's going on with my colleagues. If they're having a bad day, how I should treat them, or if I'm having a bad day, how I should act. And then I need to adjust my communication, my verbal and nonverbal communication, so that I'm interacting better with my kids, my staff members. And it just shifts everything. And it's amazing because it's not like a lot of these programs that you do, whether you use Tribes or Mind Up or some of these other ones, you do it and then you got to get a subscription, and then you got to follow all these, these booklets, and it's paper and pen, and kids sit down with. This program that I do, it's you front load it for a couple of weeks, just teaching the brain science, and then it's embedded into everything because your kids during the day, they're going to give you 20, 30 different behaviors in an hour. And every time there's a behavior, you got to use the common language. You got to talk about breathing. You got to talk about the science of motion. And it's really quick. And you'll be amazed. After a few months, all of a sudden you see kids who are you'll look over and you can see them taking deep breaths. And it's like, they're calming themselves before they punch their buddy in the face next door, right? So it's having a massive impact, and it's as it grows, it's getting more and more exciting to watch because I feel like I'm changing the education system because, and this doesn't mean there's no consequences. I still suspend kids, right? I still give kids detention because you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's about combining the two, and eventually the punishment stuff disappears because your kids start behaving better. And it's because people, when they hear, self-regulation and emotions, they think it's all flowers, rainbows, and unicorns. But really, it's just the science and teaching them to be emotionally intelligent. But to get them to here, you sometimes need to kick them in the ass still. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And eventually, the ass kicking goes away, and the suspensions decrease, and the detentions decrease, and writing lines decreases, picking up garbage decreases because they're getting more emotionally intelligent. And you find, I see schools after 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. It's almost like I never when I was I was at a high school before this elementary school. I rarely had behavior issues with kids in grade 9, 10, 11, and 12, more so 10, 11, and 12, because they were just emotionally intelligent and they could do the right thing. Right. And so that's imagine being in a world where people were emotionally intelligent, how productive and efficient and prosperous we'd all be. It'd be amazing. It's the same thing in schools, right?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, you touch on a lot of really great things there. And there's going to be people that are going to want to get in contact with you about the work that you're doing. Leroy is still a principal. He's still doing the work, but he's also got, his emotional school framework that he does as well. So if people, Leroy, wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about your work, how could they do that?
Go to emotionalschools.com.
Awesome.
That's simple. Go to emotionalschools.com. all my emails there. There's a lot of information on there. All these posters that are behind me here, that's swag that every teacher, every school that does the workshop. So they have these to put up in their classrooms. So they have the language right there. They don't have to buy. I even give them a free copy of my book, Emotional Schools. So it's all there. They don't have to go buy subscriptions and all this sort of stuff. And it's there. And then everybody just has to toe the company line together, believe in emotional intelligence. And you just shift. You don't have to bring me back unless you want a refresher, want me to come back. And then I'm available for phone calls, to work emails, and I will work within. I email teachers from all over the place all the time. It's like, hey, this is what's going on. What am I missing? And it's like, oh, here, blah, blah, and it's free, right? So it's a one-time thing. And then I teach schools how to embed it, elementary, middle, and high school, because I've done it all. And then they go, and then it's up to the trick is everybody has to be on board, and the principal has to be on board. If the principal doesn't believe in it, don't waste my freaking time, because as you and I both know, we're the leaders of the ship. And if we're steering, we better be buying in, and I think that's the biggest thing. And most principals, I think their heart's in the right spot. Most schools I go to, the principals are in, they're in.
You bet. And what we'll do is we'll put that link in the show notes so people can click on it and find you real easy, so they can get in touch with you to learn more about the work that you do. And so, Leroy, this has been a great episode. It just seems like this time is just going quickly and it's kind of escaping us right now. Is there any advice that you would like to give to aspiring principals out there? Some that you may have learned that, hey, this would be something that would be good for you to know. It helped me, and what would that be?
You know what I would say is be someone who observes, watch what's going on with interactions between staff, what your principals do, good and bad, like we talked about, and then learn how to respond instead of react. And by that I mean, don't react emotionally. Take a step back, take some deep breaths, and then respond tactfully with proper communication. And you're going to know how to respond tactfully because you've been observing, and be a student of the game. It's like when I watch sports, because I was a basketball coach, when I go and watch, I don't watch just for entertainment. I'm a student of the game. Like I'm trying to figure out why that guy's open in the corner for threes all the time. Like, or why is the post dominating, or you know what I mean? And I think that's the one thing. If you're aspiring to be a leader, be a student of the game. Just know how every pillar of your school works. And it's if in elementary school, literacy, numeracy, social, emotional well-being, right? Which is behavior, and special ed. If you're in a high school, there's tons of different departments. Know how every cog in the wheel works, and observe and learn. And don't be dismissive of the math department because they think they're smarter than everyone else, right? Or the science department, because science and math guys, they think they're smarter than everybody, right? Whereas us social studies teachers are the real geniuses.
Yeah.
Just call a spade, right? So, I mean, and that's just it. Be a student of the game. Like, be a student of the game if you're going to go into leadership. Truly understand it.
Hey, Leroy, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoy having you on the podcast today. I learned probably a lot here, just by sitting back and listening to all the things you're doing and your experiences as a leader. And I know there's a lot of people out there that this message is going to resonate. And so, Leroy, I appreciate the time that you took today to come on the show. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Jeff, it was fun, man. We could talk for the next 6 hours about this stuff. I love pedagogy.
Wow, what an insightful conversation with Leroy Slanzi. His passion for emotional intelligence, mental health, and building responsive school communities truly shines through. Whether you're a parent, educator, or school leader, Leroy's message reminds us that emotional wellness isn't a side note. It's the foundation of everything we do. If today's episode sparked reflection or gave you new tools to bring back to your school or team, be sure to check out his book, Emotional Schools, and follow his work. There's a link in the show notes for you to connect. Thanks for listening, and until next time, be 1% better. Thank you for sticking around to the very end of this episode. I hope this podcast brings value to you as an educational leader. I would invite you to share this podcast with other educational leaders, or maybe that inspiring teacher who would like to be an educational leader someday. I would also invite you to subscribe and to follow this podcast so you can get the most recent updated episodes when they drop. I would also love it if you leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars, because that would make this podcast more discoverable to other educators like yourself. You can also follow me on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, Threads, and Substack. All you need to do is look for Principal J.O., and boom, there I am. This is where we can continue the conversations from the episodes that you have enjoyed. I am so thankful for you guys for listening. Until next time, always be 1% better.